I've taught all levels of English, but at the moment, my students are mainly A2 and B1 level students. So due to their limited English ability, they often find it difficult to speak for long, extended periods of time. As a result, I often rely on information gaps so that they can produce accurate English in meaning-filled communicative situations. In this video, I'll be sharing what an information gap is, why information gaps are so useful, and my tips for creating effective information gaps. But be sure to stay until the very end of this video because I'll be sharing some of my favorite information gaps that you can use in your ESL classroom. And feel free to check out the chapters below to skip to any part of this video that fits your needs best. Let's get started. Traditionally, information gaps refer to pair work activities using worksheets where students ask and answer questions to complete the missing information on their individual worksheets. However, I think we can expand upon this definition to include any partner work where students must rely on others in order to complete the missing information for their task. The change in definition suggests that information gaps can be completed by pairs, small groups, or used in whole class situations. In addition, it's not necessary to have worksheets. Just the idea that some students have information that others don't helps to provide the motivation for learning and communicating. The main point of communication is to share information with others. In information gaps, sharing information is critical. As a result, information gaps are one of the most authentic types of communicative activities that you can introduce in your ESL classroom. While they do require a lot of advanced preparation, once assembled, information gaps allow students to work independently. This frees up the teacher to monitor and gather feedback without having to provide additional scaffolding. With information gaps, students negotiate meaning and understanding, and that's helpful because it imitates real-life situations. In these types of activities, students ask for clarification, attempt to rephrase, and confirm what they've understood. And by practicing these habits within the safe space of a classroom, students will be able to avoid misunderstanding and communication breakdowns in real-world situations as well. Another benefit of information gaps is that they help to reduce teacher talk time and increase student talk time. As a result, that leads to a more positive classroom atmosphere. Students who learn in positive classroom environments are more likely to take risks with the language that they already know. They're more adept at acquiring new language, and they're more willing to use that language outside of the classroom environment. Now let's move on to some of my tips for creating effective information gaps. First of all, information gaps should encourage students to work together to achieve a goal. Even if students are completing missing information from worksheets, I want you to think about what added task can be given so that students can use the information they've acquired from sharing information to complete a secondary task. That will help students to stay motivated and on task. Next, it's important that you give very good instructions. Information gaps work well when students are self-sufficient. And if you have to keep stopping an activity because you need to provide instructions, well, you've just ruined the activity. Instead, when I present information gaps, I do a model example for students, and then I ask ICQs, information checking questions. By doing these two things, I'm able to ensure that students understand the major components of the information gap, and I'm able to ensure that students know the target language that I expect them to use in this activity. Third, information gaps should come later in your lesson plan. Information gaps are meant to practice some previously taught target language. If you stage your lesson well, information gaps will highlight any gaps in understanding, which you can later review in your feedback and follow-up sessions. Next, it's really important that you follow up any information gap with a feedback session. These feedback sessions give you an opportunity to highlight how your students did using the target language. I always like to find some examples of specific situations where they used the target language correctly, and I always highlight some challenges that I saw that they used in using the target language incorrectly. Finally, in your feedback sessions, it's really important that you share with your students why you're having them practice in this manner. I find that my students are really invested in their learning and they want to know how every activity contributes to their own progress. In some examples of information gaps, it's really easy to see how the information gap practices certain language. However, in others, I need to be very explicit and show how certain activities are helping them to improve their language. Now, if you're getting any value out of these tips, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to this channel for more teaching tips just like this. Now let's move on to my favorite information gaps. The first information gap is a family tree. And on this empty family tree, there's only one character there, and his name is Jack. The first step is that students will complete half of the family tree by using information that I provide to them. So they're practicing their vocabulary for family members. Then they work with a partner to complete the other half of their family tree. However, as a secondary added task, I omit one person from the family tree. I later introduce this person as Alex, and the students must work together to find out how Alex is related to other people within Jack's family. This really shows how giving a secondary added task increases the motivation and teamwork in this information gap. My second information gap is called Mastermind, and I designed this activity after I realized that my students were translating vocabulary. So Mastermind can be used with any vocabulary list that you have. First of all, what I tend to do is to show images of the vocabulary words, and students have to match it with the word themselves. So connecting images with words. Second, I play Mastermind. Mastermind is a game where students have to find a specific code by 3 different colored circles. So I introduce the Mastermind, and then I put the 2 concepts together. Students are given 3 different vocabulary word images, not the word, just the images. And they have to work with a partner who has to try to guess the code. They have to guess the 3 different vocabulary words. This activity can be repeated many times, depending on how many vocabulary words you have. I found that this really helps students to think about the words in English rather than translating. I always follow up this activity by showing all the pictures of the words we're learning, not the words, just the pictures, and I point at them randomly and elicit the words from the students. I do this quickly, and it really helps to improve students' ability to think in English. Students really enjoy this activity as it's creative and allows them to really recall information quickly and in English. The next information gap is one that I do in small groups, and I use it to practice pronunciation, specifically reading and pronouncing large numbers in English. However, you can apply this to practicing different minimal pairs if you wish. First of all, I teach my students how to read and pronounce large numbers in English. I specifically go through the difference between words ending in teen and words ending in T. For example, 15 and 50. Next, I put the students into groups of 3. Each student is given a worksheet with a bunch of different numbers that are organized into 2 columns. One column is the hear column, and one column is the say column. One student will have the word start in the hear column, and one student will have the word finish in the say column. The student who has the word start in the hear column will go to the right of the word start and say the number that is in the say column. The other students will listen to the pronunciation and try to find that same number in the hear column. If they find that number, they will then go to the right of that number in the say column and say the new number that is there. This cycle continues and repeats until the student finally says, finish.
7,590.
Now, this is a really great activity because students constantly have to ask for clarification and rephrase their pronunciation. And if students pronounce the words wrong, well, they have to start over. Students really engage in this activity, and it makes it easier for me as a teacher to monitor and then give feedback at the end. The final information gap is called What's in My Recipe? And I use this activity to teach count and non-count nouns, as well as the quantifiers much, many, and the word any as well in questions. So I present that information throughout the week, and then I have the students have a recipe with 5 ingredients on their back, so they're not able to see the recipe that is on their back. They're also given a list of different ingredients that could be in their recipe. Every student has a different recipe on their back. However, these students are in pairs, so every group of 2 students has the same recipe, but they don't know who their partner is. This is a whole class activity. It's a whole class information gap. Students go and mingle with other students and ask them questions about the ingredients in their recipe. For example, is there any rice in my recipe? If the student says yes, the next question is, how much rice is in my recipe? So students are practicing their count and non-count nouns as well as their quantifiers. Once they have identified the 5 ingredients in their recipe, they then have to look and find their partner. At the end, that is the secondary task. So this shows how we can apply information gaps to the whole class as well. If you enjoy these information gaps, hit that like button and I'll make a part 2. And if you want more communicative activities for your ESL classroom, click or tap the screen now and I'll see you in the next video.